Me today, we are going to talk about foreign affairs, foreign policy. We're going to talk about the world as a dangerous place. And today, with me, I have Steve Yates. He is Senior Fellow for China and National Security at the Heritage Foundation. I think that we should start with Panama Canal because that's a great segue to China.
Sure.
Panama Canal is, we have been following it, WorldNetDaily. I was just rereading an article that my husband wrote, who's the co-founder of WorldNetDaily, along with me in 1999. It was a brilliant piece, and I'm just going to read a little bit from it. It was on October 14th, 1999. He says, I don't do this very often. I don't like to tell people what to do. I prefer to lay out my case and hope the American people are smart enough to do the right thing. But sometimes our country stands on a precipice, on a public policy abyss, and it's important to shout to everyone within earshot about the danger ahead. Today is one of those days. The United States is on the verge of making a fateful decision, one that can have profound security and economic ramifications for the country in the years ahead, and few are even aware of the perils before us. I'm talking about the surrender of the Panama Canal. I know some of you out there are saying, Farah, that's a battle we fought and lost a long time ago. To a certain extent, there's some truth to that statement. Back in 1977, President Carter signed a treaty with the Panamanian government transferring ownership of the canal to the Central American nation. That treaty requires all U.S. military forces to leave by December 31st, 1999. That was 2.5 short months from the time that my husband wrote that. What is perhaps not so well known, and here is the key that I wanted to get to, is the fact that under a companion treaty, which also becomes effective that date, the U.S. retains the right to protect and defend the canal beyond the year 2000. There's a reason for that proviso. The 50-mile-long canal connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans is a key strategic choke point in the Western Hemisphere and is absolutely vital to the security of the U.S. as well as the health of our economy. So, and he goes on, it's brilliant, but I'm a little bit biased. So in 77, we did that. That was not our first treaty with the Panamanians. It goes back to 1800s, 1906, 1935, I think 1950s. And then we have this disaster in 77. Is that America First foreign policy, Steve? Giving
Well,
away?
giving away a strategic waterway was done from a position of weakness, and it was, as President Trump might say, a bad deal. We didn't have to do what we did at that time, and we didn't have to take those terms. I would characterize the broader shift in U.S.-China policy in similar terms. We made assumptions at that time that we didn't need to make. We cut ties with allies that we didn't need to cut. And it was all, I think, based on a misreading of the power dynamics. And it's one that's extremely relevant today. For the last several decades, the People's Republic of China has been selling the world, and a lot of the world was agreeing anyway, that China was on the march, it was on the rise, it was inevitable and unchanging, and the West is on the decline, and that was inevitable and unchanging. And I think what President Trump made very, very clear in his inaugural address is not so fast. America is going to revive. It always was going to revive. And that these agreements that were made by bad presidents under bad assumptions in the past aren't going to tie his hands. And of course, the United States should have strategic control over something so vital as the Panama Canal. After all, we spent the money and built it. And so I think President Trump may be looking for a deal to be had. He may be looking to take complete control, but at the very least, the United States should be able to ensure that it is secure from enemies, foreign and domestic. And frankly, from my point of view, the American military vessels shouldn't have to pay a penny to transit those waters. We built it. If Panama's making money on others going through, that's their business. But frankly, from my point of view, if it's an American vessel, civilian or otherwise, we shouldn't pay.
Do you remember when the Chinese started taking over both ends of the canal?
Well, it's been incremental, and part of it is the evolution of Hong Kong in the decidedly wrong direction. It's another set of agreements that were made at a time when people thought the Cold War might go the other way. Prime Minister Thatcher conceded to some of the pressure that was put upon her by then leader Deng Xiaoping of China. And the Hong Kong island that was ceded to Great Britain in perpetuity was a small part of the territory of Hong Kong. And so they set in motion a timeline, somewhat similar to this Panama timeline, where the agreement was made in 1982, but in 1997, sovereignty would go to the People's Republic of China. But Hutchison Whampoa, the company that is a commercial entity of great magnitude, one of the world's largest, was based out of Hong Kong, which was a free economy under British colonialism, would have been a reliable partner through all of that. And then we went through this transition to PRC sovereignty under the promise that one country, two systems would endure. That was questionable at the time, but it was unquestionable after they passed the national security law, began shutting down media, jailing thousands of political prisoners, and began seizing assets of Westerners that didn't abide by the national security law. So, in essence, this was a Hong Kong entity that was very expert in operating ports, but now it has to be seen as part of the People's Republic of China. And just like we can't abide by Chinese Communist Party ownership of media platforms, we should not be abiding by PRC ownership or influence over key strategic waterways in our hemisphere.
Just sort of like a de facto ownership. Your little
Right.
Panama, there no doubt, there's a lot of financial gain for Panama's perspective, and it's almost like also in the Western Hemisphere, there's probably in these Latin American countries, and I can't really speak to or attest to it, but there's a level of affinity toward the United States as a Western nation, but then there's maybe because of our power and history, a desire to kind of, throw it back at our face and link up with China. Like, I don't know if that Peru port, that massive Chinese port in Peru, is part of that. I'm just speculating here, but back to reality. When we made that fateful decision, when Jimmy Carter did Congress approve that treaty in 77?
Yes, to my knowledge, this was done under renegotiation of a treaty, and it would have been something that would go to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the United States Senate to ratify. I'd have to go back and double check, but I mean, this is at minimum consistent with whatever the terms of the treaty were as it was written. Sometimes treaties are written with mechanisms to modify or exit over the term of their life, but this would have been a substantial change. I'd frankly be shocked if we went back and found that the United States Senate was not involved in trying to ratify this kind of a change.
Well, these
It's just
kinds of
completely different
treaties,
circumstances.
yeah, these treaties, I think that one thing that we should understand with foreign policy, by the way, I'm not a foreign policy expert, but to me, just common sense government is something that a lot of people with common sense can engage in discussions about. And actually, that's an historical thing, an ethic in America, is that the guy in the field knew his constitution, knew the scriptures. He knew, he was well read and he's plowing fields and he can have a conversation with his congressman. If you go back in the 17 and 1800s, that's the way America was. The average American spoke about these things and they often had very good insight. So I'll throw mine in here. I don't think that we should make changes regarding foreign policy that are permanent changes that cannot be clawed back, which we're going to do now, but under normal circumstances, when you sign a treaty, that's it. Because we don't know what the world's going to look like. Jimmy Carter, to me, it's hubris. You know, I have strong opinions on this. It was hubris on September 7th, 1977, to think that he knew what the world would be like in 1999 or 2025, and that this could be considered a safe decision to make is utterly astonishing.
Well, your common sense notions are not far off. I mean, treaties are basically like legislation generally. There is no such thing as anything that is permanent. If you are going to withdraw from a treaty, say, you look at things that have related to climate, not exactly a treaty, but the Paris Accords. The United States joined under bad
Which is a
judgment and
treaty and
circumstances, and then we
mhm,
can leave it
mhm.
also. And that's kind of why elections exist. Treaties have a force of law, and so they have a different threshold under our constitutional process for adopting them and presumably for changing or leaving them. But really, there is nothing that binds us to that other than our national interests and our desire to be able to conclude other enduring agreements when our national interests align. But those should be areas where there is broad consensus. And of course, nothing should really survive a generation or more without any kind of tinkering. I mean, 1977, you couldn't tell that there was going to be a massive economic boom in China, largely funded by us with technology transferred from us. People would have thought, well, of course that's not going to happen. You could have imagined the ragtag People's Liberation Army at that time having global reach, but now it does. And you couldn't have imagined Hong Kong at that time completely free as a British colony, a very vibrant part of the free world, the capitalist world. How could it ever fall under the control of the communists who are just coming out of a devastating cultural revolution and destroyed their own economy? So there's no reason to believe anyone in 1977 could have seen where this would go. But then don't tie future hands. If you can't see it, be humble and admit that.
And why is it that when we build something, it's sort of like the Suez Canal, you know? Um, when you invest millions or billions of dollars into infrastructure in another country, just for the privilege of managing it and using it for a limited period of time, I don't understand the whole concept. Why wouldn't we say this is, in a sense, in perpetuity, perpetuity, excuse me, and
It's as
and
long as
then
we can hold it.
yeah, and then we can talk. I mean, everybody knows that, even when you go into a business contract, there are renegotiations further down the line when things change dramatically. And if you make that very clear up front, then it's a pretty friendly engagement that you can have. So with the Panama Canal, I mean, we have, of course, the press wants to nail President Trump down to a kinetic warfare because they want to be able to point to him and accuse. But what do you think, Steve, is going to happen? What do you think the negotiations should be? If you were negotiating with Panama and saying, laying down the law, we're going to change, so let's talk about it. Tell me how that would work.
Well, I would just open the conversation with the government of Panama and just saying, look, we're all in on the joke. A generation or two ago, a bad deal was struck, and you've benefited greatly from America's investment and America's continued involvement in this enterprise. We don't question whether there's value derived from the canal for the people and the government of Panama. At the same time, we're not going to be quiet about the fact that we built this. This is a vital interest of the United States. And there's a few different ways this could go. If we get to a point of crisis and we've been materially hurt because of the activities you've allowed to develop on either end of the canal or the operations thereof, we will do what we have to do. And that will be a bad deal for you if we have to go down that road. So let's walk back from that terrible scenario and say, shouldn't we today find a more predictable and durable relationship, one that doesn't rip the United States off for having provided this and allowed for operation and even paid to use what we build? Let's do something that protects American security, allows you to continue to prosper, but our vessels are not going to pay, and America is going to ensure security at both ends of the canal. And we're not going to take extra regional interference in that lightly. But within that, Panama can thrive. American national security interests are protected. Panama continues to maintain its sovereignty, but we have unfettered access to a vital waterway that we built. And so I think I see that as an eminently reasonable conversation to have. It's not like China saying to Taiwan, "You've always belonged to us," which is a lie, and we're going to take you by force if you make us, which is a lie. It's also not like with Greenland, people say, "Oh, Trump wants to invade." He's offering to buy the territory. It's like the Louisiana Purchase. The
And I want to
senator from
talk about
Pennsylvania
that in
was
a
not
minute.
far wrong.
I want to talk about that in a minute because that's such an interesting deal, and I think people need to understand there's like 50,000 people that live there, and this is a deal that can be done. I don't want a 51st state. I don't want a 52nd state
Right.
called Canada. Um,
That would be
I
two interesting senators.
Yes, exactly. I would like my flag to remain 50 states. It's a nice, even, divisible number that I just prefer that for a lot of reasons. But what if? Firstly, I want to set this up by saying if there's also this thing called the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court and the United Nations, all three of which, frankly, I would characterize as illegitimate. Just doesn't matter what's in their charters. It matters in what they've done for 20, 30, 50, 60 years, whatever. So what if Panama is recalcitrant? What if they resist seriously? They stamp their little foot and say, "No, we're not going to renegotiate. That's a done deal. It's history. Our besties are now China, and we're sticking with them." What if they do that? And are there legal um, options that they have to take us to court in some jurisdiction? And could they win? And in the end, let's end up at a place where next question. So let's talk kinetics. Let's talk, you know, how we have to ensure that this happens, even if it goes beyond negotiation. So start off with Panama being um, recalcitrant.
Well, number one, I don't know that there's a timeline that necessarily is driving the president's thinking on this. There might be. To my knowledge, he hasn't said so publicly. He's pushing an issue that, frankly, a lot of people were either shocked or laughed off. But the more you think about it, there's something here that's worth asking about and thinking about. And I think he's basically proving that point at this moment. But really, he has the biggest platform on the planet. If he lays out how much the people of Panama stand to benefit by a readjusted deal, the government of Panama still has to face elections at some point. It may not be today, tomorrow, or the next day. But my sense is there are coalitions inside Panama that might say, wait a minute, this is not taking something from us in a way that would make us weaker or poorer. This is the most important partner in this hemisphere, if not the world, looking to restructure a deal where both sides end up better off. It's like refinancing a loan to a better interest rate. And the only party that's worse off is the bank, perhaps. And in this case, the bank is that Hong Kong owned port. They might be worse off, but Panama and the United States and others too might be better off by going through this process. But President Trump has a platform like no other to lay out what he means by what this deal could be and to make it clear how they would benefit from it. And there's nothing that describes Donald Trump any better than someone who can frame a deal and sell why this is of benefit and why we should engage in this conversation and reach a deal. And so I think at the very least, he's resetting those terms. I think it would be very hard for the government of Panama to just reject it and try to fight it in total. There's elements they might want or they might need. I don't disagree with you about the questions of legitimacy and also raw power that these other entities might have. I mean, all of them that you named have failed the mission that outlines their reason for being. There isn't a crisis in the world that they have not failed to address. They talk big, they offer these pronouncements, but ultimately they haven't made the world freer, human rights better. They have
They
failed when
failed
it
in
comes to
everything.
international
They have
security.
failed in
Right.
everything other
Every
than they're
single
the
one.
best anti-Semitic organizations in the world. But other than that, that is their one victory, if that would be called a victory. There's so many things here. So I'm going to just throw different things out, and I just jotted them down, so they're not going to be maybe in order. Um, to me, for the people of Panama, this is a choice. This is not about losing sovereignty. Yes, we built it. We spent the money. We, in one level, from an America First level, as far as I'm concerned, in a sense, we own it. I know that that's belligerent or maybe a little bit bombastic, but nevertheless, it's ours in spirit, and it should have remained ours in to the letter of the law. But they're not losing anything because they've already given China at both ends. I don't know how you would characterize it. Is it a little bit of sovereignty? Is it a military presence? Is it the control and management? What would you describe at each end's China's power and what their overall specific powers in that region, their influence, or even from graft and bribe taking, et cetera, or giving? And then I ultimately end up with the idea. So it's just really about China versus America. It's not Panama or America. Panama's either going to have this Chinese entity that is managing this and militarily and otherwise, or it's America. So it's
Yeah.
just a choice between one or the other.
I would put it as a choice between Chinese money and American and guaranteed security. If you're going to be a true reliable partner and ally of the United States, there's a lot of benefits from that. Some of them are financial, but there's ones that go well beyond that. And if the government of Panama wants to engage in what the terms of that friendly, durable alliance relationship ought to be, then let's talk about that. But if you're going to take Chinese money, I mean, these ports, there's a massive throughput of goods that go through these ports. And people who've not set foot in these areas can't fathom the number of those containers that get stacked up, how the computer programs are moving things around and tracking different things. But if you just imagine what the risks are that we face on human security, homeland, and national security realms, just think of fentanyl, think of other contagions, think of all kinds of illicit things that could be the cause of some kind of a conflict or attack or devastation. Do you trust a Hong Kong owned entity to be a responsible stakeholder on your territory to make sure that it's operating in a way that's secure? But if you are allowing them to be the managers of that and come to find out a significant attack on the United States or our personnel or our homeland is directly connected to an entity that you allowed to operate that port, do you think the American people are just going to let that slide? You're going to pay the price for making that kind of deal if you allowed to go down that road. So avoid that risk. There's got to be seen
It's a
some
good
value
point.
in that.
And you mentioned fentanyl. I had written it down like 20 seconds before you said that word. Um, Contagions, terror. They could be even bringing over doing human smuggling in those containers, and we're not inspecting. That could be, in a sense, a first stage of U.S. inspection, so that it's not all done when it gets to our ports, say in California, but it's done right there in Panama. I don't know if that makes sense, but what we're doing is having Hong Kong. By the way, what is the name of that company? The Hong Kong company.
Well, so in my memory, which might be imperfect, it was Hutchison Whampoa that was the
Oh,
the company, and I think
yeah.
its name may have evolved over time. So I don't know if it's just Hutchison or if it's Whampoa at this point.
I remember
I've
that.
lost track.
Hutchinson Whampoa, that was it. So this Hong Kong company, what are they responsible for at each end of the canal?
To my knowledge, they are responsible for the management and operation of at least two, maybe three significantly sized ports on both ends. I don't know how many ports total there are on each end of the canal. I think it's in the order of magnitude of five or six. So we're at a third or half of those ports being operated by this Hong Kong-based entity. And so, with that now very, very clearly one country, one system, that puts the CCP influence in play for those port facilities. Now, would those port facilities be used to stop American vessels from going through the port? Hard to say, but I mean, if you have some kind of illicit materials in those ports and it's radioactive, or who knows, whatever kind of sci-fi novel that might be more real than fiction, and we're in a time of crisis, say China moves on Taiwan and they want to force American panic in this hemisphere so that we're deterred from intervention in their hemisphere, then there's I think room for mischief or worse when you have a permissive environment like that. But it's basically management of a large scale port.
Do they have military presence there at all, the CCP or
Yeah,
PRC?
it's not clear to me that they play any security role in securing those port facilities. Doesn't mean they don't. It's just not clear to me. It's very evident from the reporting of a lot of independent investigative journalists that the human trafficking pipeline goes up through the Darien Gap, through Panama, up into the United States. And if they have organized crime and other illicit networks that are going through the territory of Panama to smuggle human beings and knows whatever else, it would stand to reason that there might be influences there that we don't have full knowledge of, that tie into the ports or otherwise. Of course, all of that's very, very important. That's why this isn't really about the government of Panama or private entities in Panama just taking a cool check from a generous donor or investor in China. There are other bigger considerations that, frankly, morality and national interest should be driving into their
You know, in
conversation.
1977, I can't even give a pass and say, well, Jimmy Carter just couldn't have thunk this through, because China and Taiwan have been an issue since, when did we kick Taiwan out of the UN? Because they were originally, just for those who don't remember, Taiwan was originally the China in the in the Security Council of the United Nations. And then I'm vague. I've forgotten a little bit about the exact timing of those
No problem.
changes, but we kicked Taiwan out. And
Yeah. Well, we had two dictators that were running different parts of China, engaged in a civil war. One was the Nationalist Party that allied with the United States against Japan in World War II, and the other was the Communist Party under Mao. Chiang Kai-shek was a pretty tough leader in what we called Free China at the time, but it was basically free relative to what the communists were up to. World War II ended 1945. It took a few years before the so-called international community got together and replaced the League of Nations with the United Nations. And the civil war between the communists and the nationalists really exploded after World War II, culminating in 1949 when Mao's forces defeated the nationalists and they fled to Taiwan, an island that really wasn't governed by China for any vast swaths of history, despite what some may claim, including the communists. But it was a colony of Japan. It was lost in perpetuity under the Treaty of Shimonoseki to Japan in 1895, way before World War II and World War I. And for decades, it had been a Japanese colony. So Chiang's forces come in after World War II. They moved to Taiwan. We recognize Taiwan as the leader of the Republic of China, kind of the government in waiting to go back and take the mainland, assuming the communists would fail. But it was in the early 70s in the Nixon administration when they arrived at the conclusion that the People's Republic was not going away, even though they were in a horrendous cultural revolution and had suffered terrible economic policies in their Great Leap Forward. They thought, well, the PRC is not going anywhere. It's big China with a dictator versus small China with a dictator. And they said that because Taiwan was under martial law during that time. So it was a dictatorship. It was at time the United States was prepared to recognize both and recognize independence for Taiwan, but it was Chiang Kai-shek and his dreams of national reunification that got in the way. And so it was his intransigence that led to the resolution that passed in the United Nations that didn't say that Taiwan was a part of China. It just said that the People's Republic of China, the government of Beijing, would take the seat from Taipei and represent China on the Security Council and the General Assembly. And so we had a lot of weak minds at play at that time with a lot of bad assumptions. But that's kind of the narrative of how there was a who lost China and then what happened with the Taiwan government getting kicked out of the Security Council and the General Assembly.
That's I'm glad you brought that up, or maybe I brought it up and you answered. But the fact that Chiang Kai-shek was an intransigent problem, because I had forgotten that little part of it. But the fact that Taiwan was never part of the mainland China, it's so lost in so many conversations. It's one of those things you should just say it anytime you're talking about China and Taiwan, so it could become part of the reality. So Jimmy Carter, 1977, makes this change, and China ends up moving into Panama gradually over time. And we know that the China Taiwan problem has been there since the 50s, and that the People's Republic of China has always wanted to take over the island. And we've always resisted. I don't remember first when we first set down a Taiwan policy that would stake a claim in having to defend Taiwan. Nevertheless, we did. And so
We had a mutual defense treaty. Back to the talk of treaties, we had a mutual defense treaty between the United States and the Republic of China that lasted up until the Carter administration, when the Carter administration recognized the People's Republic of China as the government of Beijing, and it made the magic words about a one China policy. It began the process of terminating the mutual defense treaty with Taiwan, and that's when the debate over the Taiwan Relations Act began. And it's been the Taiwan Relations Act pushed by the Congress that has preserved U.S.-Taiwan defense relations ever since.
Well, the whole reason I'm bringing this up is, frankly, because I'd really like to continue talking about Taiwan in some respects. But sticking with Panama, if China attacks Taiwan, and I think, outwardly at least they put 2027 is like the playbook. Something big is going to happen then. Whether that's, just for the media and the people, I don't know. So 2027, they attack Taiwan. But they've already moved their ships toward the Panama Canal. We're going to respond, but there's this choke point here. There's going to be a kinetic battle somewhere. By the way, not only am I not a foreign policy expert, I never worked in the Defense Department or the military at all, but our ships have to go through that Panama Canal. I mean, there was a reason we spent that money and all those lives were lost, because it was a brilliant move to make that waterway between those two oceans. We need it. So if they move in slowly, just sort of like Hamas did all their digging for a couple of decades on the quiet side, the extent of it and everything. If they're putting things into place right now to anticipate their future plans to take Taiwan and thwart America in, a military conflagration or whatever it looks like, we have to, in a sense, own militarily and well, we'll just leave it at that. We have to own it militarily. It's part of our national security, and it's one of the most important aspects of our national security as far as infrastructure.
Well, when I think that the United States has to own the strategic airspace and waterways of our hemisphere under all circumstances. It's very difficult for me to see how the United States is secure if we don't have that kind of dominance and some kind of a durable arrangement with our allies and partners. But ultimately, it's American power that has preserved a long period of peace and prosperity by being the dominant power on the high seas and in airspace. That's hopefully part of what President Trump's renewal and revival agenda will be. Hopefully, it will be at more efficient production times and at lower costs and less waste, and so that we can get back to the kind of power that we need to project that deterrent and reassurance message to our friends and allies. But for sure, we'd have to do it. But even short of war, the Panama Canal and the Straits of Malacca, or where Singapore is in Southeast Asia, are two choke points for energy. If we have Louisiana LNG, or as President Trump likes to call beautiful black gold, go from Texas, Louisiana, or wherever through the Gulf of America down to the Panama Canal to get to Asian customers, that's an important choke point. And so is the Straits of Malacca. If, say, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines are dependent on exports from the Middle East to sustain their energy supplies. So if China is going to take kind of a strangulation or blockade approach, and they're just trying to cause panic, disruption, and make sure that Taiwan and others run out of their strategic supplies and then have to beg for mercy, then the throughput of the Panama Canal is absolutely vital to meeting that kind of supply chain demand. Even before you get to the military questions of where are our strategic forces. I mean, we'll still have a lot of strategic forces in the Pacific battle space and otherwise that would be relevant if it really comes to that kind of a
So
confrontation.
what you're
I wouldn't
saying
want to be
is,
China in that.
yeah. So what you're saying is this is not just a military. You said it just beautifully, but I'm trying to, put it in my. You did a great job. Let me just sort of go over it.
You can
So
translate it from English into English. Do much better.
there you go. For my understanding, what you're saying is, because I'm often thinking, I go to war in my thinking, I'm against war, and especially forever wars. But I'm okay when it's necessary. Instead of first thinking military threats and national security issues with regard to, war, um, you're saying that this is about supply chain. This is about the freedom of the seas. This is about China uh, projecting dominance in things like the straits there over by Taiwan. And we need to keep all these shipping lanes open. And, we're open to that. But there's people like China and the Houthis and others that want to have these choke points. So when we are projecting power, threatening, making moves, what we're doing is it may seem belligerent to some, like, well, why do you have a right to do that, but China doesn't, or those Houthis, Hutututis. But the reality is because we're trying to maintain freedom, commerce, and what is good, and they're trying hegemonic moves, for power and disruption and
And we're not
chaos.
just making it up. We've been doing it for multiple decades, and all of our allies and partners around the world know it. They've seen it. They've benefited from it. And so it's not like America's trying to colonize these other parts of the world. It's keeping it free and open and secure for the true responsible stakeholders that want to engage in peace, prosperity, and basically friendly, normal interchange. It's the revisionists that are trying to threaten all of
We have
that.
to remember
And
history, right? So
yeah,
so this doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's country A, country B. Well, why can't country A do it if country B does? No, there is history, and we know China's history, or we ought to, and we have to make our decisions whether to be, playing the big kid on the block or, the tough guy, because we're doing it for the right reasons. Maybe not always perfectly, but we're doing it for the right reasons. And that's liberty. That's checking totalitarian empire, and it's economic, and it's for prosperity and peace as well. You know, some people would say, putting the Monroe Doctrine on the line here, if you have two hemispheres, and the Western Hemisphere is one thing, but there's a lot of stuff going on in the so-called Eastern Hemisphere. Somebody might say, well, why would you project your sovereignty over all the Western Hemisphere? Say Panama cannot do this with the canal because it's our hemisphere. And then we're over Taiwan. We're getting ourselves involved in what China might say, oh, yeah, but this is the Eastern Hemisphere or the far Eastern Hemisphere. But I think that there's a problem with the logic, and maybe, like you just said, we got to be thinking about history. Why is it okay to protect? I think we should protect the entire hemisphere from any Chinese power.
No, I don't want Islamist forces coming in and destabilizing our hemisphere. I don't want Communist Party of China doing things where they can embed capabilities that will be destabilizing for us. And after COVID and fentanyl, I think it's pretty obvious that they are willing and able to literally kill Americans without having to have a military campaign or a traditional war. And so to me, this is not hypothetical. And I'm not going to try to define or defend what the Monroe Doctrine was, because in part, I think we're in an era where the only thing that's going to matter is the Trump Doctrine. And so, if it's going to be real and it's going to happen, then President Trump is going to say, well, this is the new terms. And if they're sensible, doable, and meaningful, then they'll survive past his term in office, because it will have been an important course correction in what we're doing in terms of American use of power and recalibrating relationships with allies and partners. I mean, everything requires adjustment, and I think President Trump is a massively important
He's very
course
good,
correction in a lot of these
the
things.
adjuster in chief. We talk about Panama, but the one thing we haven't talked about is, what is China saying about all of this going on in America, about Panama specifically?
Well, of course, they don't tell the whole truth, because China basically has overtaken the money laundering operations of the cartels away from the traditional operators of those networks in the Middle East. China has stolen away some of Taiwan's few remaining allies out of this hemisphere by trying to offer some sugar money for a short time to a particular leader or a particular project, and then a reliable ally in Taiwan is replaced by communist China. And they also don't tell the truth about, basically, are they really a meaningful, positive contributor to what these countries are going to be able to deliver to their people? I mean, even if you're just looking at Chinese tech, they try to embed their telecommunications systems into what people are doing, but that leaves them in control of monitoring and shutting off, and also making it so you can't freely choose what providers you want to have competing to serve your people. You're going to have to go with ones that are compatible with their networks.
Are they doing this in Panama?
They're doing it throughout Latin America, and frankly, they've been trying to do it here too. I mean, they've had signal towers in the United States that have been tied into Huawei technology. That's a Chinese owned and influenced enterprise, and there's been, in some quarters, resistance to appropriating money to change out those towers in states like Wyoming and some others. There's a group called State Armor that's been active, going out state by state, trying to make sure that key infrastructure, and particular communications and otherwise, is insulated against a potential CCP related crisis. And you'd be shocked to find different parts of the United States that are vulnerable, but the vulnerabilities are greater in Latin America. And Panama was one of those allies of Taiwan that was taken back by the People's Republic of China. And there has been an expansion of private sector, commercial, cultural activity that seems benign, but beneath it all, of
It's
course, these
never
other things
benign.
happen.
Yes, it's all a front. It's always a front. That's just the way things work. So what you're saying to me is that Pan so China doesn't really say anything, has not made a public statement or a written statement about Trump um, and the issue of Panama. Maybe they don't want to insert themselves because then they can just say, "Hey, look, we're not doing anything there that's wrong," but it's
They, of
behind.
course, say that they're doing nothing wrong. They also have no problem with contradictions, hypocrisy, or lying. Communist parties are quite good at all of those things. Yes, there's the big C word of corruption is all over the place in all of this. But they also basically also are very, very hypocritical about this because they'll say, well, but we have contracts. This is all rule of law and private sector and capitalism. And this is, this is part of the international order. And the United States under President Trump are trying to upset this order. But they're the ones that have that have taken over the finances and operations of companies that were running out of Hong Kong that were involved in the free press and free markets and have revised things under the guise of their own national security law. So they just don't have any problem with these contradictions. And frankly, a lot of weak minded people in the West let them get away with it.
Should Trump have a Trump doctrine? I know that, we bandy this around, but should he have a come out with a Trump doctrine that covers the entire Western Hemisphere, specifically as it relates to the Islamists, Qatar, Iran? I'm not really sure what Iran's doing, but I'm sure Qatar is deep. And then China, Russia, whomever. Tell me what Trump's doctrine should be for the Western Hemisphere.
Well, I make no pretense of speaking on behalf of the president. As he has proven over the last several days, he's completely capable of speaking and acting for himself. But I do have some humble suggestions of what some of the building blocks would be. I don't know whether he would declare it to be a Trump doctrine, but I do hope he takes a completely different and a deeply strategic approach to this hemisphere. He has advisors that I think have committed their lives to doing that, that are loyal to him, believe in the America First policy agenda. But if we reinvigorate our investments, politically, economically, security wise, with key allies and partners in this hemisphere in ways that maybe some of these manufacturing supply chains come back from across the Pacific and are instead done in our hemisphere, where mining and processing are done in ways that are probably better for the planet to the extent the leftists really care about that, but would give the people of this hemisphere real economic stakes in having a good relationship with the United States. And they don't need to take these Trojan horse deals from the communist Chinese in order to just get by in their economies. If we had that more vigorous engagement where, say, a Brazil and Argentina and other major sized economies in this hemisphere were tied in with true manufacturing and economic exchange with the United States instead of these political actors that have been in charge. I mean, Malaya is a course correction, a blessed one, but just the beginning of what we need in this hemisphere. Then you would have leaders of Brazil that get elected who are not just crazy lefties. You'd have people in that country that say, wait a minute, we have billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars at stake. We're choosing the free world approach. We're choosing the American approach. We're not going to take something on the cheap from the Iranians, the Russians, or the Chinese. We've got these options, and we as a country are going to put Brazil first, just like America's put America first. And if we build these kinds of coalitions, America doesn't need to be the policeman. America doesn't need to be the sugar daddy, but America could be a real partner in these areas. And I would just look at what we did with the People's Republic of China. Not that we want to replicate it in every way, but the People's Republic wouldn't exist today if we hadn't invested trillions of dollars of concessional lending and investment, concessional access to our systems. That is what pulled them up out of poverty. And we basically fed our own enemy that's coming back for us now. We don't have to replicate that, but a little bit of that could go a long way in this hemisphere of turning those eyes back towards us in a positive
I think
way.
that is
So I'm not
so
I'm not for
doable.
invasion,
No, I'm
but I
not
think
either.
real investment could have real results.
When you look at China, building ports, and I'm sure they're not all equal in size and, effect on the local economy. I don't know. But when they are building, I think when I counted, it was 52 ports in Africa alone. All that stuff going on south of the border, that huge port in Peru. Why wouldn't our foreign policy have been? And I think that we can go in and subvert everything that has happened with the right team, analyzing every state south of our border and looking at what kind of infrastructure China's building and counter it and do some partnerships. We want America first. We want manufacturing in America. We want jobs in America. We want affluence in America. But the reality is that we have not had a relationship building foreign policy that is about it's about economic success, prosperity for our friends south of the border without taking away from American industry and prosperity and building ports. Why didn't we build a port in Peru?
Right. Well, part of it is because we have been mesmerized by a cult-like mentality that took us out of the manufacturing and building business. We followed the false promise of globalization and what it would mean. So if you look at America in, say, the 1950s and 60s, we had tons of these capabilities and would have had a lot of resources to be able to put into play to do more of this. But we went on this path of globalism and integration of places like China. So this is why the Trump revival is a fundamentally required prerequisite to being able to do what I've outlined as my ideal dream for what this hemisphere could be, because America's got to get back into the business of extracting resources and refining resources. America's got to get back into the business of really building big things. And if we don't do that, then we got very little to offer for these partners in our own hemisphere. And so that's why I think what President Trump is about to unleash with, I think, major things on infrastructure, major things on manufacturing, unleashing energy, going after responsible use of the blessings the Creator gave us in federal lands. Most Americans don't realize west of the Mississippi, there are oodles of states that are majority owned by the federal government when it comes to land. East of the Mississippi, it's like 3%. But there's huge resources that the good Lord intended for us to put to use
We were
for the
supposed
betterment
to
of
be
mankind.
stewards,
And
not
yes,
not I don't know. I could hug a tree, but it wouldn't be for the same reason as a tree hugger. We need to steward the resources that God gave us, and taking it all out of bounds. Like remember the monument
yes,
that Clinton did, I think, so we could get Indonesian money or whatever. It was just this complex thing, and they took the something national monument. You remember that in
yeah.
yeah.
Well, there's several controversial monument issues, and it might seem far afield from the China stuff, but it's not, because even if you just look at in southern Utah, in the Clinton administration and in the Obama administration, and then again in the Biden administration, there were these vast monument declarations that were made. Now, when the Monuments Act came into force, it was meant to basically leave land the size of what you would put the Washington Monument on or the memorial on. Wasn't meant to put hundreds of thousands of acres or millions of acres off.
Yeah, when you look at the map of the United States, a map that shows you the territory that is now owned by the federal government, which is not really a good plan for a federal system. We are federalists, and I think that those states should be managing that. And that's a
Yep.
whole. I got to have you back, and we could talk about that, or maybe you could suggest somebody. When you see that map, it's like the federal government owns 40% of the West, and it's insane. Would Trump, has he ever voiced any hints at selling
Oh,
that
I
land?
think that's why the Secretary of the Interior was put in charge of his Energy Commission, because if we're gonna have a revival of abundant, affordable, and reliable energy supply in the United States, the first best place to begin opening the aperture of that development is going to be on those federal lands. It can be done responsibly. It also could be done on the sovereign lands of Native Americans. That's another reason to have the Secretary of Interior, the key liaison with a lot of those organizations, be involved in leading what our drive towards these vital rare earth materials, vital minerals, and a beautiful supply of energy. But basically, if we're going to compete with and overtake a challenger like the People's Republic of China without having to fight a war, we can't do that with one hand tied behind our back. They're doing everything they can, and maybe even more than they should, to strip the value of the resources they've been endowed with to try to race ahead and impose their form of government and their influence on us and others, to divide us. We've been in this with our hands tied behind our back and not using all we could. This is what I think President Trump is turning the tide on, and it's why an American revival is not just possible; it's imminent if we
It's
just
happening.
do these some things.
It's happening. Does BRICS and Belt and Road have anything to do with Panama? I mean, is there?
Uh, they do, in the sense that you have the C in BRICS is China, and they definitely have collaborated with the others in untoward ways. You have the collaboration with Russia on the invasion of Ukraine, among other things, and you have the conflation of all of them with Iran, busting sanctions and empowering that deathly network of proxies that led to October 7th and other kinds of travesties in the broader Middle East. So BRICS is relevant, but basically, we don't need to obsess about what BRICS is doing if we get our quote unquote stuff right. We have more at our disposal that blows doors on these guys, and others will want to participate. Our allies will want to come along. We will make Canada great again. We could make Mexico great and safe. We could make this hemisphere
We want that for
self-reliant.
foreign countries, don't we? We don't just want
Yeah,
America to be great again. We want our allies, and someday we'd like our enemies, who are now our enemies, to be our allies, because they've turned into nations that have the ethic of making China great again, actually for the Chinese people and freedom and God and prosperity and peace. But that's, I don't know. I'm probably going off into the millennium here. But the point is, being America first does not mean that we don't want Canada to make Canada great again, Mexico to make Mexico great again. It's the definition of what great is really going to be the operative words, right? So, by
absolutely.
the way, Gordon Chang, I did an interview with him some time ago, and he said, we talked about his book, that he thought that America needs to utterly, in a very severe or dramatic way, cut ties with China, and many areas. Well, his prescription was just across the board. Now, I don't think that what he's saying is we need to become belligerent, but that China is such a great threat to the United States of America, communications, national security, their infiltration, spy networks, all of this, we've got to cut the cord and make a stand. How would you characterize what Gordon was saying and what you're thinking?
Well, Gordon's a longtime friend, and I have a lot of agreement with him. I would frame it this way, and I think Gordon's fundamental uh, uh, assumption is that China under Xi Jinping's leadership is on a war footing, and so it's doing everything it thinks it can and should do to mobilize resources, deploy capabilities that will weaken and divide its opponents and increase its comprehensive national strength so that at a time of its choosing, it can impose its will. And that the United States is not, and our allies have not been on a similar war footing. That can be right or wrong. I think that there's more right than wrong in that assumption. But I think what's undeniable is we have to take it as a given that Gordon could be right about what this thinking is and the direction of this movement is. And so, if so, what should we responsibly do now in advance of a crisis? Now, I would argue that we've already been in a Cold War with China throughout this period of diplomatic relations. We've just fooled ourselves into ignoring the economic and political warfare that's been conducted against us. But the physical parts of it, the capabilities have vastly increased. But put that aside, you have to then look at what are the things that we have to depend on in a time of crisis if a power the size of China's is truly seeking to do harm against us. Can we allow them to have ownership or control over modes of communication in the United States, our power grid, our universities, our markets? Would we need to have manufacturing capabilities in order to mobilize the size of Navy and Air Force we would want to have in a time of that kind of confrontation? And so are we going to just drift into this and have a lost couple of years at great cost in order to mobilize? Because America Awakened is an awesome and scarily devastating force that China should never want to see. But Americans shouldn't want to go through that initial period of great suffering, an adjustment of that period of mobilization either. So